everyone, welcome to the community classroom. This is Dr. Tracey McCarthy, psychologist, attorney, and educator, and we are going to be addressing restorative justice, the process, part 2. In part 1, if you recall, we addressed the timeline for Japanese reparations, and what we're going to do in this particular section, we're going to address the timeline for Jewish reparations related to Germany. And so we are going to look at the Jewish reparations timeline, just like we did with the Japanese timeline. We're going to look at the timeline from complaint to determination to allocation, and we're also going to contrast the dynamics with Jewish reparations and Japanese reparations. And as always, if this appears on anything other than Dr. Tracey McCarthy, it is stolen and unauthorized. Let's get started. Now, as with Japanese reparations, many people are asking questions about the time frame for Jewish reparations. Now, the process for Jewish reparations and the process for Japanese reparations, those were two entirely different processes. One was international and one was national. But what we're going to do is, just like we covered the Japanese reparations timeline, we're going to cover the Jewish reparations timeline. So the time frame is in a similar time period, of course. So it's 1945. The Jewish people raised demands for reparations after the war. Then it wasn't until 1952 that Jewish people were awarded reparations, and this was based upon an international treaty. So this is different, as you can see, from what happened with the Japanese Americans. And in this situation, the Jewish people received reparations from the Federal Republic of Germany, West Germany. They were obligated to pay reparations after losing the war. And the amount of reparations amounted to, in US dollars, $845 million. And this was for Jewish beneficiaries, and it was spread over a 12-year time period. Now, this money was actually, the reparations were paid to Israel and the Conference on Jewish Material Claims against Germany. And so this wasn't something that was just paid from Germany directly to individual Jewish people. And here you can see a copy of the cover for the documents related to the agreement between the government of Israel and the government of the Federal Republic of Germany. And so you can see this is a reparations agreement that was based upon an international treaty and an international dynamic, which again contrasts with Japanese Americans applying for reparations from their own government. Now let's quickly look at what happened with the Luxembourg Agreement. First of all, the Luxembourg Agreement was a reparations agreement, and it was between two sovereigns. And so this is not the same as when someone is seeking reparations from their own government. And so this was between Israel and the Federal Republic of Germany. This reparations agreement was signed in 1952. Now remember, the complaint and the demand started in 1945. And so there was a signing of an agreement in 1952. And then there was not enforcement until 1953. And as you recall, the payments were to be spread out over a 12-year time period. The purpose for this reparations package was to pay Israel for the cost of resettling refugees after the war. And there was also compensation provided for individual Jews for loss of livelihood and loss of property. And a point of clarification is important right now, because there is a belief that the United States actually provided reparations for Jewish Americans under the Obama administration. That was not reparations. There was no quote-unquote reparations. There was no losing of a war and then providing reparations. This was a package of assistance to assist those who were identified as Holocaust survivors in the United States who were living below the poverty line, and it was related to some matching funds in order to provide some resources in terms of programs in the Jewish community. So this was not a reparations package like the Japanese Americans received reparations for harm done to them by the United States government. And so what happened with the Japanese Americans would be more similar to what would be happening with American descendants of slavery, of enslaved individuals. And so when people think about reparations related to Japanese Americans and Jewish people in relation to Germany, what happened with Jewish people in relation to Germany is more akin to CARICOM seeking reparations. And so it's an international dynamic, and you're talking about sovereigns seeking reparations from other sovereigns. That is in contrast to Japanese Americans, individuals seeking redress from their own government. And so that is much more similar to what would be going on with individuals who would be seeking reparations as American descendants of the institution of slavery, of Jim Crow, that dynamic. And so that's more similar to Japanese reparations, national level reparations, versus what CARICOM is doing, which is more similar to what the Jewish people did in relation to Israel and Germany. And as we wrap this up, a quick note related to debates and distractions. There are a number of individuals who are engaged in all sorts of debates that are distracting in terms of the ultimate goal of reparations. And so some of the topics that come up are things like the right to reparations, who's going to fund reparations, and then there are these sidebar conversations that are going on that are also distracting related to inter-ethnic tensions and cross-cultural discord. It really doesn't matter in terms of reparations. It really has no place in the conversation about reparations. And it's also tied to issues related to national origin discrimination, where individuals in the United States are feeling discriminated against in terms of education and employment in relation to individuals who are coming from outside of the United States. This definitely is an important issue that needs to be addressed with educational institutions and employment institutions. However, it really has no place in the discussion related to reparations. Another issue that is very distracting is the dynamic whereby those who are identifying as Pan-African or now Pan-American, those entities are now making demands that the discussions related to reparations be sidetracked in order to discuss and center Pan-African and Pan-American Indian interests. These are things that are distracting, and they are not going to serve the purpose of getting to the goal of reparations. If people do not have single point focus, they are going to be distracted and blown about by any wind, and they are not going to reach their goals in an effective manner. One of the things that I want to point out related to Japanese reparations that might help people here is this idea, this theory that was undergirding the push for Japanese reparations. Japanese individuals, Japanese Americans, had the understanding that the reparations, they were not for the people who had actually been harmed. They weren't even necessarily for the people who were fighting for the reparations in the moment. The reparations were for the children. And so that is something that people might want to keep in mind. As you can see, based upon Japanese American reparations and Jewish reparations, it takes time. And so people need to have it in their heart, in their minds, and in their spirits that this is really for the future. Remember, knowledge is power. Take care and see you soon.